welcome. You're watching Financial Planner, and joining us in the studios today is Feroze, Azeez, Deputy CEO of Anand Rathi. We're going to be talking about a relatively interesting subject, which probably has become redundant in the last few years, if I may say so. It's about government saving schemes. So let's break this down, right? I mean, there are a bunch of saving schemes that the government currently runs. One of the relatively more popular ones is the post office saving schemes. Again, there are so many options out there. For the sake of our viewers and for the sake of simplifying this, tell me which ones those are and which ones are actually relevant in today's day and age.
Correct. I think there are about 8 to 9 of them which are listed, out of which some of them stand out as things which you should be aware of, and you should use those as vehicles to achieve the objective on your portfolio and your goals which you wish to achieve. So if you start listing them, the first one, of course, is the savings account. A post office can have a savings account as well. So that's one. Then you have a 5-year recurring deposit which happens in a savings in a post office. That's called a recurring deposit, 5-year recurring deposit. Then you have a time deposit, which is not recurring, which is for the lump sum investment. That's the third one. The fourth one is a monthly income scheme, which actually provides for a monthly income, depending on the amount you've invested. Then you have the newly introduced senior citizen savings scheme, which is targeted towards the seniors who are retired and who want to bring in stability into their portfolio. Then you have the Kisan Vikas Patra, which had actually been removed from the list in 2011. Then it made come back in 2014. Then you have Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, which was recently introduced for the girl child, especially in your family. Then you have a public provident fund, which is abbreviated as PPF, which is a long-term debt investment, which is post-tax. So these are the few which are important to understand, may not be in the chronological order of importance, but some of them are definitely very relevant to each one of us.
Okay, so just to sort of come back to this, right? Every time we have the budget, there's always some addition, subtraction. Like you said, one of these schemes was removed in 2011. They've been reintroduced again, which makes the whole system even more complicated, right?
Correct. See, what happens is, of course, it becomes complicated because you're doing amendments as you progress. And then the relevance, because of the dynamic situation of an external factor and the schemes itself changing, becomes two variables to understand. So it's very important to understand what is contemporary. So if we say there are about 4 of them very important. One of them, if I start with the senior citizen savings scheme, which is of course important to those people who are retired and above the age of 60, get to use this scheme with a maximum investable amount of 15 lakh rupees. And a minimum investment amount of as little as 1,000 rupees.
So the closest comparison to this, which is probably a little more popular, would be senior citizen fixed deposits.
Correct. Which have a marginally higher interest rate.
Right, and the only thing is that there's no insurance cover beyond a lakh of rupees, and therefore this one scores in terms of safety, and especially if you're a senior citizen, right?
Yes, but the difference between a senior citizen fixed deposit and this is the fact that this has a significantly higher interest rate.
So what is the rate differential, if I may ask?
It's almost about, as we stand today, it's about 200 basis points, by which I mean 2%. So 9.3 is the interest rate a senior citizen can actually extract out of this, whereas today fixed deposits for senior citizen are about 7.25 to 7.5.
Right, and let's talk a little bit more about the senior citizen savings scheme, right? So one, you said that there's an upper limit of 15 lakhs, you can invest up to 15 lakhs. How easy or difficult is it to make these investments now?
See,
because with the fixed deposit, all you do is go to your bank, tell them this is what you want to do, and it's a very simplified process, right?
Correct. If you have to rate these as ease of executing these transactions after you have the intent to, the ease is not as simple as you would go and walk into a bank and get that done, but you have to go to a post office and get yourself started on this. So I would say it's twice more tougher, but it's well worth it because you don't have to revisit it too often, because 5 years is the period, and I think because of that you don't have to visit them too often. So ease of execution first time is something which is.
What is the lock-in period? So how do you want? So if you redeem before your date, how do you get penalized? I mean, I guess that would be important to know, right? Because you don't want your money that's locked away and not available when you need it, right?
Correct. So you can exit with a penalty after 1 year, before 1 year, 1.5%.
So it's a 1 year lock-in, to be fair.
1 year lock-in, 1.5%. There's actually a second year penalty as well. That's 1%.
And after 2 years, there's no penalty on it. So after 2 years, it becomes an easy exit-free option. Yes. Also, in terms of, we've talked about lock-in, we've talked about the rate of returns. How does one go about transferring this? Like we said, it might be difficult to start off with because you'll have to go to your post office and do this. But every area, every locality has their own local post office. But what if you move homes? What if you move cities? Then how does one track this?
I think it's a very practical problem, Samina. Because you're speaking of long periods of time, you might not be living the same place. Especially retired people move from metros to their hometowns. Are these transferable to any post office in the country? The answer is yes. Is the procedure as simple as it could be on a click of a button? The answer is no. Okay. You'll have to go through that little painful process to actually do this transition from one post office to another. But fortunately, it's becoming simpler due to the support of technology. These post offices today are being privy to.
Right. I mean, how transferable is this instrument? Because, I mean, you don't really know when you might have to transfer this to somebody else, maybe your children, maybe your wife. Is that easy or is that complicated?
See, there are two reasons of transfer. One is to sell your certificate.
Okay, but then you get penalized if it's within the first 2 years,
correct. Right? Yes, and when it comes to inheritance of this, because when you're a retired person, you're also planning for the transition of this money. The good part is it's very simple to transition this to the legal heir who's entitled to this money on the demise of the person who actually owns it. It's simple. That's what I would say.
So it's not as complicated as we'd imagine it to be because it's a post office savings scheme. I think the other problem people have is not being able to touch, feel or see their investments. So usually with the bank FD, you get a statement often enough to know that your money is safe. With mutual funds, it's a click away. You can see what your NAV stands at. With this scheme, how easy is it to sort of review it?
See, I think review is not as important because you've locked in an interest rate, which is reasonably higher. But it's, of course, important to have the tangibility factor, which most of us as Indians, because we have come in an environment of survival of the fittest, we like assets which we can touch and feel. But when you're in the second half of your life, where you're trying to use the money which you've saved in the first half and spend it, I think liquidity and financial instruments have a large role to play than the fixed assets like gold and real estate. So I think it's very relevant from a retired person's perspective because he will need monies for different expenses. Could be medical expenses, could be his daily expenses, which he has acclimatized himself to during working life.
Right. For the sake of our viewers, what's the tax efficiency on this one?
See, the tax efficiency, especially senior citizens, because of their age and they having retired, their tax brackets suddenly come down. So, is it tax efficient for a person in the highest tax bracket? The answer is no.
Okay.
If you are not in the highest tax bracket, which is what most senior citizens would be because they've retired, then the tax efficiency comes back in. Second is there is a TDS, tax deducted at source, if the interest amount supersedes 10,000 rupees per annum. So there is a TDS. And if you are entitled to claim that back, you will have to go through the process of filing your return and claiming it back. That's one tedious process.
You would need an accountant to help you through this, realistically speaking. We'll have to take a quick break, but we'll come back. We'll talk about all the other schemes that are available at your disposal and which you should be aware of. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Financial Planner, and today we're talking about government savings schemes, and in particular this episode is also going to focus on post office savings schemes. Feroze, in the previous episode we talked about senior citizen savings schemes. Let's talk about a few more relevant ones that are actually important and one should be aware of. Kisan Vikas Patra. This, by the sound of it, sounds very rural focused, but I'm guessing it's not because you talked about how we should be bringing this up.
Correct. I think it had immense popularity when the interest rates were really high. Then it lost its sheen for a long period of time. That's when the government pulled back the scheme in 2011. They reintroduced this in 2014. I think the good part of this is it's relevant to all age groups, unlike the previous one which we spoke of, NSCC. Where
all income brackets?
All income brackets, all people, irrespective of age, can buy this. It's a certificate which actually doubles your money in 8.4 years. Okay, so in a falling interest rate scenario, locking in that interest rate is very, very critical. And if you can have an instrument which is transferable, so liquidity becomes an easy thing, especially when the instrument is backed by the government. Selling them and creating a secondary market for it is not very difficult. And there are brokers available to help you sell this and buy it.
Okay, let's talk about the features of this, right? First, you got to tell me, you said it doubles your money in 8.5 years. Does that mean you're locked in for 8.5 years?
Yes, technically you are, because the certificate will extinguish itself only after 8.5 years. The only source of your liquidity is if you find a buyer to shoulder that certificate for the residual
And how liquid are those markets? I mean, you said it's easy to find a broker, but how easy is it in practicality?
In practicality, it's marginally tougher than redeeming a mutual fund. Definitely far tougher than redeeming a mutual fund, to be fair. But is it impossible to find one? The answer is no. Since it's a debt instrument, earning you a fixed return, you are able to pledge these and borrow on them.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because there is a secondary market for it.
And there's an element of safety and, of course, certainty in this. Well, you said that there is a market available, but if I had to ask, and I think this is important for our viewers, right? Because like you said, mutual funds, it's 2 days and the money's in your bank. Once you find a broker who's going to sort of help you sell this or transfer this, what is the average time that is usually taken out? Because, I mean, we're talking about an instrument in today's day and age where it's all about instant, right?
Okay. So this process of liquidation could take you good week to 10 days easily.
So that's a realistic way of looking at it, right? Is there a cap on how much money you can invest in this? Because senior citizens, you said, was capped at 15 lakhs. What about this?
There's no cap. They come in denominations of 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 rupees and 50,000 rupees. So these certificates can be bought in these denominations and held. So is there a cap? No. A person can own as much as he chose to.
Also, you did tell me that this was going to double your money in 8.5 years. Now, the sound of that is very exciting. But in today's day and age, this instrument is its closest competitor would be? Just so that people know what you're looking at, really.
There'll be two comparing products. One would be the tax-free bonds, which are issued by all these infrastructure-based companies backed by the government, like NHAI, IRFC and stuff. So that's one very important competitor. But this is better for a person in the lower tax bracket for the fact that he gets the higher interest rate and he's anyways in the lower tax bracket. So the element of tax-free bonds doesn't give him as much benefit as a person who's in the 33% bracket.
So what is the tax efficiency again on this?
So these are interest. So interest is taxed as per the marginal tax rate slab you are in.
Okay, so very similar to what we've already got. So you said it's transferable as well. In terms of ease of investments, how does one go about executing this certificate? So all you go to a post office and buy the certificate, is it?
Since this is not an individual account which gets opened, buying these certificates is far easier because these are transferable, so it becomes easier. So it's simpler than getting yourself a senior citizen savings scheme opened. So
you did say that this is one scheme that would fit all pretty much. It works for all income brackets. It works for all sort of age groups. But if I had to ask you, in what particular age band, income group is this highly recommended?
It's very highly recommended for that debt portion of one's portfolio in the age bracket of about 30 to 40, who has a debt portfolio, who wants to park money to bring stability to his portfolio, and in the contemporary situation where we envisage that the interest rates could slip as lower as another 150 basis points on fixed deposits in the next 1.5 years, it will be so prudent to actually lock in an 8.4 year doubling cycle, because the doubling cycle can actually stretch itself to 11 years and 12 years. So if a person locks in his interest rate today, he will save himself a couple of years of debt return if he locked in today.
So if I had to look at another debt instrument, it would take me about 11 to 12 years to double my money, is what you're saying, versus Kisan Vikas, which gives me the option of 8.5 years of doubling. Well, it sounds like a winner already here. But just moving on from there, another important one you talked about was Sukanya Samriddhi.
years.
Tell me a little bit more about this one.
So this was, of course, one scheme to promote the savings for a girl child. So a person gets to invest lump sum or in monthly installments up to 1.5 lakh rupees for his girl child. And the money gets locked in till the girl child is at the age of 21.
But it's only up to 1.5 lakh.
Up to 1.5 lakh per financial year.
Okay.
So you have to minimum contribute for 14 years. That's the minimum contribution period. And then at the age of 21, that comes as a savings for the girl child and gives you about 9.2% interest rate locked in for that period.
But if there is an eventuality, if there is a crisis, this money is off limits. It's not accessible to you.
Exactly. The liquidity is a big challenge out here, and accessibility of the money in case of contingent requirements is quite a compromise.
You said the minimum investment was 1.5 lakh, right? The maximum investment is 1.5 lakh. And of course, 14 years. So depending on whatever year you start, it's going to be up to 14 years. Also, in terms of execution, how difficult or easy is this to execute?
Since it's a new scheme, the processes laid down for the execution of this are far simpler than the older schemes.
Okay.
Because they're far more contemporary. This is just a few years old, not decades old. So I think creating a Sukanya Samriddhi account for your child, a girl child, is far easier than the rest of the post office.
And this again is extremely tax efficient. If you're looking at a 14-year investment, I guess it's tax-free by the end of it, right?
Correct. It's not tax-free at the end of it, but it gets compounded yearly, and you don't pay the tax, and you're deferring your tax for such long periods of time.
Okay, transferability, I don't know if this is even relevant to ask you, but if it has to be transferred from one child to another.
They can't be transferred.
And this is only for girl child?
Girl child, yes.
What about grown girl adult?
No,
so it has to be under a certain age is what you're looking at, right?
Absolutely.
And in terms of, you said your execution is fairly simple, but is it as simple as going and Googling Sukanya Samriddhi and then finding a way to do it? Is it as simple as that? Or you need a broker, you need an accountant, a financial planner to help you with this?
Fortunately, most of these schemes today we are speaking of have a one-stop shop, which is the post office.
Okay, so this is part, like you said, this is part of the post office schemes. Okay, moving on from another relatively popular one, which we still talk about often if you're employed, is the Public Provident Fund, so PPF. Shed some light on this, right? Because I think all we know is at the start of the year, your HR person will tell you, allocate some money to PPF, and that's pretty much the start and end of it. Tell me more about PPF and the relevance of it in today's times.
See, PPF has two tax benefits. One is it helps you reduce your income for that particular year and helps you save the tax day one as per Section 80C. So that's one benefit, that you get a tax discount if you invest.
Straight away.
The second tax benefit is whatever the interest you earn is also tax-free.
Okay.
So first you've got a tax discount that year, right away, and then whatever you ended up earning, which gets accrued to your account on every April 1st, is also tax-free. So there are two tax benefits, point one. Point two is that it has a 15-year lock-in, so brings in certain kind of a discipline.
Right.
Now that there is a compromise on the liquidity, there is also a benefit that after 3 years, you can borrow against them.
Okay.
Right? So there is illiquidity and also kind of liquidity, because you can access this money by lending, by pledging it to a bank or to an NBFC. So that's the second. So in a falling interest rate scenario, it becomes very advantageous to lock in post-tax, tax-free returns in a PPF. Unfortunately, there's a cap of 1.5 lakhs, and you can't extend it beyond that in a financial year. So that's the limitation. But having said which, should people use that limit? I think they should use that limit of 1.5, because you are getting a government backing. And if you went and compared it with a government-backed gilt fund or a Government of India debt fund, gilt fund as they call it, the returns are as little as 6%.
And what are the returns on PPF, you said?
8.3.
8.3. And there's also something like an employer PPF, employee PPF, where your employer also contributes to your PPF. Can you tell us more about that?
Correct. So that is EPF, Employee Provident Fund, and you have a Public Provident Fund.
Okay.
See, before we get to Employee Provident Fund, one important thing, which is a change which might not have come to notice, is that a Public Provident Fund had a rule of a locked-in interest rate.
Okay.
Now, those interest rates are being visited by the government every quarter and reduced downwards. Okay, so
that may not be a very good thing, right? You'd imagine.
Yes, I think government has done a smart move from their perspective that when the interest rates were going up, it was locked in. It was locked in.
Okay, and on the way down, it's actually volatile.
So that's one thing you have to know, that there's a difference.
So then why would you recommend this if it's going to be variable returns?
What happens is, as we have a lower inflation in India, the indexation, which is your key to having lower taxation on the debt funds, the indexation benefit is coming down over a period. So taxability of debt funds is increasing.
Okay.
And this is post-tax. So at a point in time, any time you measure over the period of 15 years, you will at least get 1.5% more.
Okay.
And that's a large portion to let go on the debt side.
And even if the quantum of this investment is capped at $1.5 lakh, this might be actually quite appropriate for somebody in a higher income band, right? You'd imagine, because of the tax efficiency of this.
I completely agree with you. People who are in the higher tax brackets, they would have automatically finished their ATC limits using EPF, Employee Provident Fund. So they don't get motivated to add 1.5 lakhs more because they don't get a tax discount. But fortunately, since they are in the highest tax bracket, the second element of tax-free interest is very appealing. But people miss doing that and don't use this 1.5 lakh limit.
Because you think your limit's already been covered. In fact, I think that's a common norm that most people practice. On that note, we'll take a break. We'll come back. What we've discussed in this segment is largely about debt sort of instruments. In the next segment, we'll talk about government's retirement planning schemes, which will largely give you the option of investing in equities as well. So stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Financial Planner. We only have a couple of minutes to go, so we'll very quickly take you through the government-backed retirement plans that are currently offered. Feroze, in the previous segments, we largely talked about debt instruments that the government offers through the post office savings schemes. But I believe the government-backed retirement plans also gives you an option to invest in equities. So can you take us to what these retirement plans are all about?
See, there's one which is prominently coming up kind of a instrument, which is called the National Pension Scheme, which to my mind is very meritorious for a young person to build his retirement corpus over long periods of time. So NPS, to simplify it, unlike all of what we spoke in the previous two segments, this has an option for you to allocate your money into equity. And it is proven time and again that equity is the only asset class in the financial space which can help you create wealth to live a happy and a rich retirement. So when you speak of NPS, it's quick to understand 3-4 important features. That there are two accounts, Tier 1 and Tier 2 accounts. Tier 1 is a mandatory account, which is a locked-in account, which has minimum 6,000 rupees to invest a financial year. Tier 2 is a liquid account where you can put and remove your money, 2,000 rupees being the minimum. On any financial year, if your account has less than 2,000 rupees post charges, the Tier 2 account will automatically be closed. So that's one thing you have to be careful of. Now, if you go into Tier 2, why would somebody go into an optional investment? Tier 1 is mandatory. Tier 2 is optional. Why would I do that? Because the money which goes inside gets managed by the same mutual fund industry fund managers, the top fund managers, and I get to choose who are my fund managers. Just like in a mutual fund scheme, I get to choose the mutual fund depending on which of the fund managers I'm most confident about. You can do the same thing here. And importantly, it's important to remember that it's going to be at 100 the cost of buying a mutual fund. So in long periods of time, this cost saving comes as a very large.
So NPS technically, I mean, in layman's terms, is just a framework to do your financial planning, right? I mean, you can determine the percentage you want to put on a Tier 1 and the percentage you want to put on the Tier 2.
Correct.
So it replaces a financial planner, fair to assume that?
It is one of the vehicles.
In terms of asset class, I'm saying.
Correct. It does, definitely. But does it solve the entire mystery by just having an NPS? The answer is no. There's several reasons to believe so. But should it be a part of one's portfolio? The answer is a big yes.
And how much percent would you allocate, if I had to ask you, in terms of, I know it's not one fits all, but just a large sort of ballpark on how much percent should be allocated to NPS?
For the already accumulated assets, NPS might not be very relevant. For the monthly incomes, like you do SIP, systematic investment plans, if somebody does an X amount of SIPs per month, he needs to at least have 30 to 40% of that. If he's doing a 10,000 rupees systematic investment plan for his retirement, 4,000 rupees out of which can actually be put into NPS.
Is there an upper limit?
There's no upper limit in Tier 2.
There's no upper limit in Tier 2. And what about, again, lock-ins, transferability? What about those features?
Since you have in that, you make your choice, you can actually redeem Tier 2 in a very simple fashion. As and when you want.
So it's almost a click away like a mutual fund would be. How transferable is this?
So there's no so they're not transferable.
Okay.
Okay, they are redeemable. So
at any given time, that's Tier 2. What about Tier 1?
Tier 1 is locked in.
So that, of course, would be able to be transferred if that.
No, you can't transfer your account. So you'll have to wait till it matures.
And then get out of it, and then, of course, you exit it. What about tax efficiency? I guess similar to, because it's equities in Tier 2, then I guess 1 year beyond 1 year, it's tax-free then.
So yeah, the equity portion inside is tax-free. So
and Tier 1? Again, going back to what we talked about already, right?
Right.
And how easy is this to execute? Because Tier 1, Tier 2 just sounds very complicated.
Unfortunately, it had a lot of teething issues when it started. Now it's becoming simpler by the year. But this is one instrument everyone as an Indian should know of and should use.
And how do you go about doing this? So who would be the best person to go to, one-stop shop for this too on NPS?
There are designated public sector banks.
Okay.
Okay, and the list is a very large list.
So
and
PSU
so you
banks
might have,
would help you with an NPS
There might be a bank right next door who would be able to help you with an NPS.
Also, so just to quickly wrap up this conversation, we only have a minute or so. From whatever we talked about in the last few minutes, in terms of priority, give me your top 4.
Right. So, Kisan Vikas Patra, Senior Citizen Savings Scheme, Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, PPF and NPS. NPS, I would rank it as the first, within the debt schemes, those 4, and NPS in the equity category.
And even senior citizen, like you said.
Yes.
Okay, well, with that, I guess we're completely out of time, so we will wrap up this conversation on financial planning. Thanks for coming. Thank you for watching.